The auctioneer's gavel struck wood with the finality of a gunshot, but it was the silence that followed that made every soul in Crimson Ridge hold their breath. 300 people had gathered around the makeshift auction platform behind Hartwell's general store, their eyes fixed on the magnificent black stallion that stood defiant in the center of the ring, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian under the harsh afternoon sun. The horse had already sent 2 experienced handlers to the doctor and kicked a hole clean through the reinforced wooden fence. His eyes burned with an intelligence that seemed almost human, and when he reared up on his hind legs, pawing at the air with hooves the size of dinner plates, even the bravest ranchers stepped back. "Gentlemen, ladies," called out Erasmus Hartwell, mopping sweat from his brow despite the autumn chill, "this here's Shadowmere, finest piece of horseflesh to ever grace our territory. Purebred Arabian, shipped direct from the Kensington estate. Back east, starting bid is $500. The crowd murmured among themselves, but no hands rose. 500 was more than most men made in half a year, and the horse looked like he'd rather die than be tamed. 400. Hot voice cracked slightly. He'd invested everything in this auction, hoping to retire on the profits. 300. Surely someone recognizes quality when they see it. Sheriff Beaumont Calder stood near the platform, his silver badge catching the light as he shifted uncomfortably. He'd warned Hartwell about bringing such a dangerous animal to town, but the man hadn't listened. Now he watched the proceedings with growing concern, his hand resting instinctively on his revolver. $200, a voice finally called out. It belonged to Jeremiah Stockbridge, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties. But I want him broken proper before I take delivery. Shadowmere snorted and stamped, as if he understood the insult. His dark eyes swept across the crowd, and several people swore later that the horse looked each one of them in the eye, measuring their worth. 150, countered another voice. 125. The bids continued to fall as the reality of the situation became clear. This wasn't just an unbroken horse, this was an untamable force of nature wrapped in muscle and sinew. Then, from the back of the crowd, came a voice so quiet that people had to strain to hear it. $1. The laughter started as a ripple and built to a roar. Men slapped their thighs and women covered their mouths, trying to contain their mirth. Even Sheriff Calder cracked a smile. Standing at the edge of the gathering was a figure that most folks had barely noticed, a lean cowboy in worn leather chaps and a hat that had seen better days. Coltrane Westbrook had drifted into town 3 days ago, asking for nothing more than a place to water his horse and maybe earn a few coins, mucking stalls. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent more time talking to animals than people. "Did you say $1, son?" Hartwell called out, his voice heavy with condescension. "Yes, sir," Coltrane replied, stepping forward. His spurs jingled softly with each step, a sound that seemed to calm the agitated stallion. $1. The crowd's laughter intensified, but something strange was happening. Shadowmere had stopped his frantic pacing and was now standing perfectly still. His ears pricked forward, focused entirely on the approaching cowboy. Sheriff Calder felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something wasn't right here. "Now hold on there, stranger," Sheriff Calder stepped forward, his voice cutting through the crowd's laughter like a blade through silk. "This ain't no joke. That animal's already put 2 men in Doc Morrison's care, and I won't have blood on my hands for the sake of some fool's pride." Coltrane Westbrook paused, his weathered hands hanging loose at his sides. He tipped his hat respectfully to the sheriff, revealing steel-gray eyes that held depths most men never reached in a lifetime. Appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I reckon there's been a misunderstanding about this horse. Misunderstanding? Jeremiah Stockbridge pushed through the crowd, his face red with indignation. Boy, that beast's got more devil in him than a preacher's got scripture. You're fixing to get yourself killed over $1 worth of foolishness. The stallion's ears flicked at the harsh words, and he took a step toward the fence, his massive head swinging in Stockbridge's direction. The rancher instinctively backed away, bumping into the people behind him. Easy, son, Coltrane murmured, though it wasn't clear if he was talking to the horse or the rancher. He moved closer to the fence, and something remarkable happened. Shadowmere extended his neck, nostrils flaring as he caught the cowboy's scent. Erasmus Hartwell stood frozen on his platform, gavel raised but forgotten. The crowd had gone quiet, again sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I know what you're thinking, Coltrane said, his voice carrying in the stillness. How can a drifter with holes in his boots understand what a fancy horse needs? But sometimes the most beautiful things in this world are also the most wounded. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted what looked like dried herbs, holding them in his open palm. Shadowmere's entire demeanor changed. The wildness in his eyes softened, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition. Sheriff Calder's hand moved away from his gun, but his confusion deepened. What, in Sam Hill? These are prairie sage and sweetgrass, Coltrane explained, never taking his eyes off the horse. My grandmother taught me that horses remember not just what they see, but what they smell and feel. This stallion's been through something terrible, haven't you, boy? As if in response, Shadowmere lowered his great head and made a sound that was part wicker, part sigh. It was the first gentle sound anyone had heard from him all day. Widow Mackenzie, who ran the town's boarding house, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Blessed Mary, he's talking to that animal like it's a person. Maybe that's because someone forgot he was one, Coltrane replied softly. He extended his hand toward the fence, palm up, the herbs clearly visible. I've seen horses broken by men who thought force was the only language animals understood. But breaking something and training it ain't the same thing. Shadowmere took another step forward, then another. The crowd held its collective breath as the massive stallion stretched, his neck over the fence, and gently lipped the herbs from Coltrane's palm. His eyes never left the cowboy's face. Impossible, breathed Stockbridge. That horse tried to take my hand off not 10 minutes ago. Because you were treating him like a possession instead of a partner, Coltrane said, his voice gaining strength. This horse has been misunderstood, mistreated, and probably sold a half-dozen times to men who saw dollar signs instead of a living soul. Sheriff Calder stepped closer, his lawman's instincts telling him there was more to this story than met the eye. How do you know so much about this particular horse, Westbrook? The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Coltrane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for a moment something flickered in his eyespan, maybe, or guilt. Let's just say I recognize the signs, he said finally, and I'm willing to bet my dollar that given a chance, this horse will show you what real partnership looks like. The auctioneer found his voice again. Now see here, we've got serious bidders with serious money. The man made a legal bid, Sheriff Calder interrupted, his cop's instincts telling him to let this play out. Are there any other offers? The silence stretched like a taut rope. Shadowmere had completely calmed, standing peacefully beside the fence with his head near Coltrane's shoulder. The transformation was so complete it seemed like magic. "This is preposterous." Jeremiah Stockbridge's voice boomed across the auction yard. "Hartwell, you can't seriously consider selling that magnificent animal for a single dollar to some saddle." Tramp. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but Sheriff Calder raised his hand for silence. Something about the scene before him, the calm horse, the quiet cowboy, the almost mystical connection between them told him this was bigger than a simple livestock auction. "The bid stands," Calder declared, his voice carrying the weight of law, unless someone wants to counter it. $500, Stockbridge snapped. "Final offer." Coltrane didn't even turn around. He was gently stroking Shadowmere's nose, whispering words too soft for the crowd to hear. The horse's ears were pricked forward, and he made soft nickering sounds in response. $1.01, came another voice from the crowd. It belonged to Prudence Whitmore, the schoolteacher, who had pushed her way to the front. Her usually severe face was soft with wonder as she watched the interaction between man and horse. "I've seen enough broken spirits in my classroom to recognize healing when I see it." The crowd began to buzz with excitement. More hands went up. $2, called out Doc Morrison, who'd just arrived after tending to the injured handlers. "If that cowboy can calm him like that, maybe there's hope for the others who've been hurt." $3, added Widow Mackenzie. Sheriff Calder watched in amazement as more people joined in, not trying to outbid each other into bankruptcy, but adding small amounts a dollar here, 50 cents there. It was as if the entire town had decided they wanted to be part of whatever was happening. But Stockbridge wasn't finished. $1,000, he roared, "and I'll throw in a job for any man brave enough to break that beast properly." The crowd fell silent again. $1,000 was more money than most of them would see in 5 years. Hartwell's eyes lit up with greed, and he opened his mouth to accept. "You're missing the point," Coltrane said quietly, finally turning to face the rancher. "This horse doesn't need breaking. He needs understanding." "Pretty words from a man who probably doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together," Stockbridge sneered. "What can you offer that animal that I can't?" "I've got the best ranch in 3 counties, finest pastures, top quality, feed, respect," Coltrane interrupted. "I can offer him respect." The simplicity of the answer hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Shadowmere whinnied softly and nuzzled Coltrane's shoulder as if agreeing. Sheriff Calder made a decision that would be talked about in Crimson Ridge for decades to come. "Tell you what, gentlemen, instead of just selling to the highest bidder, why don't we let the horse choose?" "Let the horse choose," Hartwell sputtered. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "Is it?" Calder stepped closer to the fence. "Mr. Stockbridge, you've got all that money and all those fine facilities. Why don't you step into that ring and show us how this horse responds to what you can offer?" Stockbridge's face went pale. "I'm not getting in there with that devil. That's what hired hands are for." "And Mr. Westbrook," the sheriff continued, "you've got your dollar and your ... understanding. Care to show us what that's worth?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama. This had gone far beyond a simple horse. Auction It had become a test of 2 very different philosophies about how humans should treat animals. Coltrane looked at Shadowmere, and the horse looked back. It was a moment of pure communication that needed no words. "Sheriff," Coltrane said softly, "I'd be honored to step into that ring, but I want everyone here to understand something first." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying despite. It's quietness. What you're about to see isn't magic, and it isn't luck. It's what happens when you approach another living being with patience instead of force, with understanding instead of domination. He paused, his grey eyes sweeping across the faces of the townspeople. And it's what this horse has been waiting for his whole life. Sheriff Calder opened the gate to the ring. The crowd held its breath as Coltrane Westbrook, a man with nothing but $1 to his name and holes in his boots, stepped into the enclosure with one of the most dangerous horses anyone in Crimson Ridge had ever seen. Shadowmere turned to face him, and for a heartbeat, neither man nor beast moved. Then the horse took a step forward, and everything changed. The moment Coltrane stepped into the ring, Shadowmere's entire body language shifted. The stallion's head came up, ears pricked forward with an alertness that seemed almost human. He approached the cowboy with deliberate, measured steps, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his ebony coat. The crowd pressed against the fence, barely breathing. Even Jeremiah Stockbridge had gone quiet, his face a mixture of disbelief and growing concern for his $1,000 bid. "Easy, boy," Coltrane murmured, extending his hand palm down this time. "I know it's been a long road." What happened next would be retold in saloons and around dinner tables for generations. Shadowmere lowered his magnificent head and gently pressed his forehead against Coltrane's chest, making a sound that was part wicker, part sigh. It was the sound of a soul recognizing home. "Sweet Mother of God," whispered Doc Morrison, "I've never seen anything like it." But Sheriff Calder was watching Coltrane's face, and what he saw there made his lawman's instincts prickle. There were tears in the cowboy's eyes, and his hands were trembling as he stroked the horse's neck. "You know this horse," Calder said suddenly. It wasn't a question. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even Shadowmere seemed to pause. Sensing the shift in tension, Coltrane's jaw worked silently for a moment, his hands never stopping their gentle movement along the stallion's neck. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "His name isn't Shadowmere," he said quietly. "It's Midnight Thunder, and 3 years ago, he was mine." The confession rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Erasmus Hartwell's face went from confusion to fury in the span of a heartbeat. "Now you just hold on there," the auctioneer sputtered. "I got papers on this horse, proper bills of sale from the Kensington estate." "Papers can be forged, Sheriff," Calder said grimly, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun, "or obtained through less than honest means." Coltrane never looked away from his horse. 3 years ago, I was working a spread up in Montana Territory. Midnight here was my partner best cutting horse you ever saw, and the smartest animal I've ever known. We worked together like we shared the same mind. His voice caught, and he had to pause before continuing. Then the ranch went under. Bad drought, cattle prices dropped, and the owner couldn't pay his hands. I had to sell everything I owned just to eat, and that included ... double quotes. He couldn't finish the sentence. "You sold him," Widow Mackenzie said softly, her heart breaking for both. "Man and beast. Sold him to what I thought was a good home," Coltrane continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fellow claimed he needed a horse for his daughter to ride. Seemed kind enough, paid fair price. I thought Midnight would have a good life." Shadowmere Midnight Thunder nuzzled closer to his original owner, as if sensing the pain in the story. But something went wrong. Sheriff Calder guessed. Coltrane nodded grimly. "I heard tell later that the man was a horse trader, one of the dishonest kind." Sold Midnight to someone else within a week, probably for 3 times what he paid me. From there, ... he gestured helplessly. Lord knows how many hands he's passed through, how many men tried to break what was never meant to be broken. The crowd was dead silent now. Even Stockbridge had the grace to look ashamed. That's why he's been so wild, Doc Morrison said with sudden understanding. He's been looking for you, and that's why he calmed down the moment you appeared, added Prudence. Whitmore, he recognized your scent, your voice. Coltrane buried his face in Midnight's mane, and the great horse stood perfectly still, offering what comfort he could to the man who had never stopped missing him. So you see, Coltrane said, raising his head to look at the crowd, my bid isn't really about the money. It's about making right something that should never have gone wrong in the first place. Sheriff Calder holstered his gun and stepped closer to the fence. Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to need to see those papers you mentioned, and I'm going to need to verify their authenticity. Hartwell's face had gone pale. Now see here, Sheriff, I bought that horse in good faith. Maybe you did, Calder replied evenly. But if there's fraud involved, we need to get to the bottom of it. In the meantime, ... He looked at the reunited pair in the ring, man and horse standing together as if they'd never been apart. I think it's pretty clear who this animal belongs. With Jeremiah Stockbridge cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, he said grudgingly, I suppose my $1,000 wouldn't mean much to a horse who's already found his home. The crowd began to murmur agreement, and suddenly people were reaching into their pockets, again not to bid, but to contribute to helping Coltrane buy back his partner. Keep your money, folks, Coltrane said, his voice stronger now. I made the bid I could afford, and it's the bid I'm sticking with. $1, fair and square. Midnight Thunder whinnied softly, as if agreeing that some things in life were worth more than money. Sheriff Calder's weathered hands examined the papers Erasmus Hartwell had produced, his experienced eyes scanning every line and seal. The crowd waited in tense silence, their attention split between the official documents and the remarkable sight of Coltrane working with Midnight Thunder as if the 3-year separation had never happened. These papers are genuine, Calder announced finally, but they only tell part of the story. According to this documentation, the horse was sold by one Cornelius Ashford of the Kensington estate to a dealer named Quincy Bramwell, who then sold him to Mr. Hartwell here. Coltrane looked up from where he was examining Midnight's hooves, checking for signs of mistreatment. Quincy Bramwell, he said grimly. That's the man who bought him from me, claimed he needed a gentle horse for his daughter. A lie that's cost this animal dearly, Doc Morrison observed, noting the scars on Midnight's flanks and the way he favored his left rear leg. This horse has been through hell. Hartwell shifted uncomfortably under the crowd's increasingly hostile stares. Now look here, I didn't know any of this when I bought him. I paid good money, in good faith. How much? Sheriff Calder asked quietly. I beg your pardon. How much did you pay Bramwell for this horse? Hartwell's face reddened. I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. Calder's voice carried the full weight of his authority. $50, Hartwell mumbled. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. $50 for a horse that should have been worth 10 times that amount was clearly a deal made with full knowledge that something wasn't right. $50, Widow Mackenzie repeated incredulously. For a horse like that? Mr. Hartwell, you knew perfectly well you were buying stolen goods. Not stolen, Hartwell protested. Bramwell had papers, forged papers, most likely, Sheriff Calder said. Mr. Westbrook, can you prove your original ownership of this animal? Coltrane nodded, and approached Midnight's left shoulder. "Midnight, show them your star," he said quietly. The great stallion immediately lifted his head high and turned slightly to the left, revealing a perfect white star-shaped marking just below his ear that had been hidden by his mane. "Every horse has unique markings," Coltrane explained to the fascinated crowd. "But Midnight here has something special." He ran his hand along the horse's neck, and Midnight responded by pawing the ground 3 times with his right hoof, then twice with his left. "I taught him that when he was just a yearling," Coltrane continued. 3-2 spells home in a code we worked out together. No other person knows that signal." The demonstration was so touching that several women in the crowd were openly weeping. Even Jeremiah Stockbridge looked moved. "Furthermore," Coltrane said, reaching into his vest pocket, "I've got something else." He pulled out a small, worn photograph showing a younger version of himself standing beside a magnificent black stallion. "This was taken the day I first broke him to saddle. You can see the star marking if you look close." Sheriff Calder examined the photograph carefully, then looked at Midnight Thunder. There was no question they were the same animal. "Mr. Hartwell," Calder said formally, "it's clear that you've been in possession of property that was obtained through fraudulent means. The original sale to Bramwell was based on false pretenses, making all subsequent sales invalid." "But I've got money invested," Hartwell began desperately. "Your dispute is with Bramwell, not with Mr. Westbrook or this horse," Calder replied firmly. "The law is clear on this matter." Prudence Whitmore stepped forward, her schoolteacher's voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Hartwell, you said you paid $50 for this animal. The town has been witness to something extraordinary today. I propose we take up a collection to compensate you for your loss, provided you surrender all claim to the horse." The suggestion was met with immediate approval from the crowd. People began reaching into their pockets, and within minutes, more than $60 had been collected. "There's your $50 and then some," Doc Morrison said, pressing the money into Hartwell's hands. "Consider it a lesson in doing proper business." Hartwell looked at the money, then at the crowd's expectant faces, then at Coltrane and Midnight Thunder. The cowboy had his arms around the horse's neck, and the stallion was nuzzling his shoulder with obvious affection. "I suppose," Hartwell said reluctantly, "that this is for the best. That horse was more trouble than he was worth anyway." "No," Coltrane said quietly, his voice carrying across the auction yard. "He was never trouble. He was just lost and looking for his way home." Sheriff Calder made the final announcement. "By the authority vested in me as Sheriff of Crimson Ridge, I declare that this horse, known as Midnight Thunder, is the rightful property of Coltrane Westbrook, purchased legally for the sum of $1. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Midnight Thunder whinnied proudly, as if he understood that he was finally, truly free. But the day's surprises weren't over yet. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement over the day's events, Sheriff Calder approached Coltrane, who was carefully checking Midnight Thunder's tack and equipment that had come with the sale. "That was quite a demonstration, Westbrook," the sheriff said. "But I've got to ask, what are your plans now? A man and a horse need more than just each other to make a living." Coltrane looked up from adjusting Midnight's bridle, his weathered face thoughtful. "Well, Sheriff, I reckon that depends on weather. This town has a need for someone who understands horses the way most folks understand their own kin." Before Calder could respond, Jeremiah Stockbridge approached, hat in hand. The wealthy rancher looked genuinely chastened by the day's events. "Mr. Westbrook," Stockbridge began awkwardly, "I owe you an apology. I've been breaking horses the hard way for 30 years, and I thought that was the only way. But seeing what you did today, well, it's opened my eyes to possibilities I never considered. He paused, gathering his courage. I've got 40 head of horses on my ranch that need training. And after today, I'm not sure my methods are the right ones anymore. Would you consider coming to work for me? Top wages, and you'd have complete authority over the horse training operation. The offer was generous, more generous than anything Coltrane had been offered in years. But he shook his head slowly. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Stockbridge, I truly do. But Midnight and we're not really the working forth folks type anymore. We've been apart too long to go back to taking orders. Stockbridge nodded, understanding. Well, if you ever change your mind, the offer stands. As the rancher walked away, Doc Morrison stepped forward. Coltrane, I've been thinking about what happened here today. That horse of yours wasn't just physically injured, he was emotionally damaged too. And you healed him with nothing but patience and understanding. The doctor's eyes were bright with an idea. I've seen men come back from the war with that same kind of damage in their hearts. Men who've forgotten how to trust, how to connect with other people. What you did today makes me wonder if your methods might work with people too. Prudence Whitmore overheard and approached, her usual stern demeanor softened by excitement. Dr. Morrison is right. Coltrane, have you ever considered teaching? Not just horse training, but the philosophy behind it. The patience, the respect, the understanding. The idea seemed to spark something in Coltrane's eyes. Teaching, you say? Think about it, Prudence continued. How many men in this territory break horses the way Stockbridge used to? How many animals suffer because their owners don't understand the difference between breaking and training? Widow Mackenzie, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. And I've got a proposal to... You need a place to stay, and I've got an empty room at the boarding house. More importantly, I've got a stable out back that's been empty for 2 years. You could set up your own operation right here in town. Sheriff Calder grinned. Sounds like Crimson Ridge is trying to adopt you, Westbrook. Coltrane looked around at the faces of these people who had started as strangers and had somehow become allies, even friends, in the space of a single afternoon. Midnight Thunder nuzzled his shoulder, as if offering his own opinion on the matter. You know, Coltrane said slowly, I came to this town 3 days ago with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and a handful of memories. I was planning to move on tomorrow, same as always. He paused, stroking Midnight's neck thoughtfully. But maybe it's time to stop running from the past and start building a future. The next morning, a new sign appeared outside Widow Boarding House, Westbrook Horse Training, where trust begins. By the end of the week, Coltrane had his first 3 students, not horses, but their owners, men who wanted to learn a better way to connect with their animals. Word spread quickly. Throughout the territory, within a month, people were traveling from hundreds of miles away to learn Coltrane's methods. But he never charged more than a family could afford, and he never forgot the lesson that reuniting with Midnight Thunder had taught him. The most valuable things in life couldn't be bought with money. Years later, when folks told the story of the cowboy who bid $1 on the Stallion, they always ended it the same way. And that's how Crimson Ridge became known throughout the West as the place where broken spirits, both human and animal, learned to trust again. Coltrane Westbrook had found his home, and Midnight Thunder had found his peace. But more importantly, they had reminded an entire town that sometimes the most powerful connections aren't bought or sold. They're simply recognized, respected, and allowed to flourish. In the end, that wanderer bid had purchased something far more valuable than a horse. It had bought hope, healing, and the kind of second chance that money can't buy but the heart can always afford.